Okay, so we're in week 13. Well, I guess this is actually week 14 because there were technically 2 days of class last week. But as hopefully everyone had realized, I didn't get any confused emails, so I think everyone got the email and the announcement. We decided not to do anything last week, so everyone had a nice break from this course to enjoy whatever they happened to do over the holidays. Um, and so now this is the last full week of class. Next week, the last day of class is Tuesday the 5th. So there are only 2 days officially of class next week as well. Um, Given that, what I'm going to do, there will be a week 14 set of material. And what I will do with that is I'll leave it up there. I'll do a lecture and everything, but it will all the assignments and looking at that lecture will be counted as bonus, right? So it's a bonus week, essentially. It's bonus in the sense that any grades on the quizzes, the active reading stuff, whatever, even watching the lecture will count as extra points. So basically, if you have a 0 for a discussion one week or a 0 for some other assignment one week, and then you do something in week 14, that will replace that 0. So instead of trying to have specific bonus assignments and trying to work it out with individual students, to avoid any type of unfairness or anything like that, we'll just make week 14 assignments a bonus week. You will have one assignment that you will be required to do, and that is turning in the slides. So the presentation slides, it currently says that they're due at the end of this week. I'm just going to give you until the end of next week to do that, so you have plenty of time to do it. So they will be due on today is the 27th. They'll be due, I think, on the 10th of December. And then the final for this class, so online classes, I get to basically put the final whenever I want. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on the last day of finals, which is the 14th. So the final will be available all day on the 14th. If you already have a lot of finals on the 14th for other classes of yours, please let me know and we can arrange something else. But otherwise, I'm just going to have it open all day for you on December 14th. You'll take it, and then I have to have grades in by the 17th, so I've got a couple days after that to sort things out. I will try and grade it all on the 15th, so that on December 15th I can lay out everyone's grades finalized. You can look at them, and if there's anything that still looks awry, you can contact me, and we'll have plenty of time to fix it before I have to turn in my final grades. So there's that. I will do a separate little lecture about the presentation slides to give you instructions for them. I will essentially go through a short little presentation, a sample one which is modeled after sort of what you need to be doing. So look out for that. It will be in the week 13 stuff. I'll put up an announcement about it. And so hopefully that will explain any questions you have about that. Any other logistical announcements I want to make? Yes. So until December 17th, the Student Assessment Initiative, or whatever it's called, is open. You can follow a link that was probably been emailed to you, where you can go online and take standardized surveys about your courses. So this course is the first time an online intro philosophy course has been run here by the philosophy department at ETSU, and I'm responsible for developing it. And so the office of whatever the office is which manages all of the online classes, they're very interested in the students' feedback for these courses. So it would be very helpful to me and also to the university in general for you to take a look at that survey. If we can get a high percentage of students giving us feedback on that, that would be helpful. So you will have gotten emails about taking these SAIs, I think they're called, probably sometime last week. I will send you another email and put up an announcement about it because, again, it's quite important for a class which is essentially still under development. Any good instructor is always working on their courses. It will change a little bit from one term to the next because you're never going to get it totally right. Let's just face it. And so my classes change a great deal from one term to the next based on direct student feedback or my own read of how the students engage with the material. For the most part, you all have seemed to engage pretty well with the material, with the discussion sections. I've had a high level of participation in the assignments, a high level of participation of watching the lectures, and I will fill out the, the participation grade sometime between the 14th and the 17th of December. So although there will be a whole bunch of grades that go up in that period of time, so you'll get a lot of notifications about that, and we can sort out any problems at that point. So I appreciate that you've all been very active and engaged in this course. And so I would like you in this survey, which is again entirely anonymous, to let me and the university know how this course went for you. And of course, you can also, if you want to tell me directly by email anything about how you felt this course went, positive or negative, you can do so. You know, I'm an adult. I'm not going to let any of your sort of criticism of my course. I won't take it personally. It won't affect you in any way. But if you're worried about it affecting you in any way, you can always email me after final grades are in, that is after the 17th, and let me know, oh, Dr. Butts, I thought this was terrible. You should quit your job, blah, blah, blah. You can say that sort of stuff if you want. Hopefully, your criticism will be more constructive than that. But university professors are used to being disliked by their students, so you're not going to say anything to hurt my feelings. With that out of the way, let's go and talk about this week's material. So we're still in political philosophy again. And when you do your reading for the reading sequence, we will be back with the familiar, wait, have we already looked at a Nozick argument? Yes, the Wilt-Chamberlain argument that you looked at for the week stuff on equality, which, you know, was the week before last. The same author is writing the article which you'll look at for the reading sequence this week, Robert Nozick. You may recognize a sort of theme in his work. So this week, we're not talking about equality, we're talking about state authority and the legitimacy of state authority. Or just in general, actually I got it backwards. We're looking at the Robert Nozick argument in this presentation. So the legitimacy of state authority. Now, so we will be discussing anarchy, and I'll be specifying what anarchy is in the context of political philosophy. It has a slightly different meaning than the one that I have sort of gathered that most students associate with it, which is namely anarchy is equivalent to chaos. That is not what it means in the political philosophy context, so let's clear all that stuff up. So, for our purposes, here are some definitions of political philosophical positions. So, political philosophy, sometimes it's thought of as maybe like a further subdivision of the subdiscipline of ethics, but practically, political philosophy is an entity unto itself. It is incredibly applied. It is often incredibly applied. And it is the place where when political philosophy is very abstract and sort of ignores applied issues, people notice it the most. So there is a great deal of very abstract political philosophy as well. And when I say abstract, I mean where it's all about theorizing about the ideal state, where sometimes that is gravely out of touch with the actual state and actual people's lives. We won't get into too much about that. We're a little bit more zeroed in on a specific topic here. But here are four prominent types of political position. And we're stipulating these definitions here. So, anarchism, political anarchy, is just the view that all state authority is illegitimate. That means state authority has no moral backing. That's the idea with the anarchist here. That is, you have no moral reason to follow the laws put forward by a state. You may have practical reasons, i.e. they will kill you or imprison you or fine you if you don't follow the laws, but there is no moral reason to do it. And in fact, there is probably, as you will see in the argument that you read for the reading sequence activities, there might be reason not to follow the law, right? Moral reason to ignore the law, right? And so anarchism is not about a total lack of order, so it's not about chaos. It's just eschewing, that is, staying away from state-ordered societies. And so state here is something that maybe I should have put up a definition for on the slide. The state in political philosophy is usually taken to be the entity which has a monopoly on the use of violent coercion to induce compliance, right? So, for instance, I'm not allowed to go out and punish somebody for stealing. If I do that, I can also get arrested. However, the police or whomever, they can go out and punish someone for stealing, right? The police don't get arrested for punishing people, even when they do it too much. So that's what I mean by a sort of monopoly on force. It would be illegal for me, to start some war on my own initiative, and I could be arrested for that. I won't have the protection of the United States. I'm not allowed to have a standing army, all that kind of stuff, right? So a state is something which has a monopoly on the accepted use of force, something like that. So the rejection of state authority is the rejection of a monopoly on the use of force, basically. And this is the very thinnest definition of a state, and therefore the very thinnest definition of anarchism. So I stress this because you can have such a thing as anarchist collectives, right? Some types of anarchists, which are called anarcho-capitalists, usually, excuse me, let me get rid of that. Okay. Anarcho-capitalists say that the only sort of legitimate laws and authority are those which are entered into freely as contracts by individuals. So that's why it's a capitalist sort of thing. Market order is the only legitimate orders, is something like what the anarcho-capitalists would say. The libertarian acknowledges the practical need, at least, for minimal state authority and perhaps even the moral legitimacy of a minimal state authority. And the legitimacy of such a minimal state is secured by, as it says, securing the maximal exercise of individual liberty. So in the American context, you're all familiar with libertarians. They often stress, that freedom and liberty is paramount, that things which restrict individual liberty are, unconscionable. They're about as close to anarchists as you can get, while still working within and accepting a state apparatus. The idea of a night watchman state, it comes to us from Robert Nozick and libertarianism, where a night watchman state is a state which only protects you from external invaders, i.e. has an army, protects the sanctity, enforces the rules of contracts, and protects you from internal violence. So a very minimal police force, which might not actually be state-run in some of these scenarios, a military to protect you from invaders from other countries, and then some kind of legal apparatus to guarantee that people follow their contracts and are punished when they do not. Liberalism is a political view which allows a great amount of state authority and legitimates or says that this state authority is legitimate on the basis of securing a target quality of life for everyone. And what limits the authority of a state in liberalism is sort of the rights of individual people or the rights of groups of people. So this is, as it were, a slight step, I don't want to say forward or backward, a slight move from libertarianism, where there are further goals acknowledged as legitimate goals of a state. So the state does not exist merely to secure the maximal exercise of individual liberty. The state also exists to guarantee a minimal quality of life for its citizens, right? That's the big difference between libertarianism and liberalism. As it were, the libertarians sound slightly callous, right? They don't particularly care about whether or not anyone gets a particular standard of life. That's up to them, right? It's not up to anyone else but the person themselves to see that their quality of life is sort of acceptable. And the libertarian is also going to make arguments for that apparent callousness by saying that no kind of imposed quality of life standard from above is going to respect everyone's liberty. So it doesn't have to be, it's not motivated by callousness necessarily. It simply appears callous to many people who accept that there can be a kind of intersubjectively or objectively agreed upon minimum standard of living, right? So the liberalists see a slightly expanded role for the state, but it is still severely limited. It is significantly limited, let's say, by substantial individual rights of the same sort that the libertarian would recognize and just sort of see as being more restrictive on the state's authority than the liberalist would. Finally, the totalitarian, we could say, says, we could define by saying, they say that all state authority is legitimate, and that the state is essentially in control of every aspect of its citizens' lives. The state has business in regulating your personal life as well as your public life. The state has business in regulating agriculture, and industry, and entertainment, and intellectual discourse, etc., right? So the totalitarian state is the sort of thing that you see often in dystopian science fiction futures like 1984, like the movie Equilibrium, Aldous Huxley's Brave New Worlds, etc., etc. This state which has basically swallowed up its citizens' lives entirely. So again, this is all about state authority. So as I said, anarchism is consistent with the existence of corporate authority, epistemic authority, religious authority, etc. It does not necessarily require that each individual is a total authority unto themselves and does not have to and should not listen to anyone else about anything. Anarchism does not have to say that. Now, of course, a robust sort of complete anarchism could say something like that, but it is not required. And generally, that is not the sort of anarchism that we see discussed seriously. It is limited to political authority, usually. So, as I said, we're going to be talking about Robert Nozick. He's an American political philosopher, he's fairly well known. He made lots of contributions to ethical and political philosophy. He also made contributions in epistemology, that is, the theory of knowledge. He is, I guess, probably the second most famous American political philosopher of the 20th century, outranked by a huge margin by John Rawls, who is a liberalist political philosopher, whose most famous work is A Theory of Justice, which casts an extremely long shadow in American political thought, but in international political thought as well. Robert Nozick's influence is much more limited to American political thought. Robert Nozick writes his work Anarchy, State, and Utopia in response to A Theory of Justice as a criticism of this more substantial liberal political and moral order that John Rawls envisions, and Robert Nozick puts forward a different picture of political and moral order, which is different in a variety of ways, but different for our purposes in being libertarian rather than liberal. So we are going to look at, for the rest of this presentation, Nozick's argument that taxation is forced labor. So let's just dive right into it. Premise 1. Forced labor, that is slavery, occurs anytime one must perform some labor under threat of severe punishment, i.e. pain, prison, death, etc., and yet, 2, the benefits of one's labor go to someone else. Premise 2. All forms of forced labor are immoral. Premise 3. The state requires all working citizens to pay certain taxes in order to benefit the needy or face severe punishment, for instance, prison time. Premise 4. A is a working citizen. So A here is a random person that's a citizen of the state in question. Conclusion 1. If citizen A does not pay taxes, then the citizen will receive severe punishment, that is, they will go to prison. Premise 5. If citizen A does not work extra hours, then the citizen will not be able to pay their taxes. Conclusion 2. If citizen A does not work extra hours at their job, then she will receive severe punishment, that is, they all go to prison. There's some kind of typo in there. She goes to prison. Premise 6. Citizen A receives no benefits for the extra hours spent earning the money to pay her taxes because this money goes to the needy. Conclusion 3. During the time when citizen A is earning money needed to pay her taxes, the citizen is 1. Performing some labor under threat of severe punishment, another typo there, and 2. The benefits of her labor go to someone else, namely the needy. Conclusion 4. During the time when citizen A is earning the money needed to pay her taxes, she is undergoing forced labor, that is slavery. Conclusion 5. Taxing a citizen to help the needy is immoral. Premise 7. The same argument can be made for each taxpayer. Conclusion 6. All instances of taxation are immoral. So, the long and the short of this argument is that Nozick is saying taxation is tantamount to, that is, practically equivalent to slavery. Slavery is wrong, therefore taxation is wrong. That's basically how the argument goes. So let's dive into this a little bit. The idea is that premise 1 through conclusion 1 they'll be agreed on by everyone. So you try and do this with the first couple premises. You establish a common ground, a set of premises and conclusions that any reasonable person would agree to, and then you move forward from those to the conclusion that you desire. And often you are moving from intuitive premises to an unintuitive conclusion, right? Something that people will find much more controversial. And then, of course, the problem is, well, if they think the first set of premises is non-controversial, and they think the moves from those premises, the logical moves made from those premises are legitimate, how can they object to the conclusion which they find intuitively controversial? This is a very common dynamic in philosophical arguments. So what did P1 through C1 say again? If you don't pay your taxes, if tax laws are enacted and enforced correctly, then what happens is when you don't pay your taxes, you go to jail, or your wages are garnished, you are penalized and have to pay more, etc., etc. Something bad happens, right? So, in the argument, Nozick says that if you don't pay your taxes, you go to prison. So notice that this is largely not true of what happens to most people when they fail to pay their taxes in the right way in a timely fashion. They're punishable by fines. So the question is whether or not fines are severe enough to satisfy the definition of forced labor which we see in P1. So going back to P1. Forced labor occurs anytime one must perform some labor under threat of severe punishment, and yet the benefits of your labor go to someone else. So no doubt, when you pay a fine, you are, paying money that you earned, and it's going to someone else. You don't get to benefit from it anymore, and well, there you go. But is that severe in the right way? We certainly don't want to equate paying a fine with being enslaved. That seems to be going too far quite easily. So a lot of the pull of the argument may depend on what types of taxes we're talking about. So as I say, premise 5 and conclusion 2 may depend on what type of tax we're talking about. Working more hours does not straightforwardly correlate with properly paying income tax, right? So I think there's a typo there because that doesn't make any sense. There's a lot of typos in this presentation apparently. There are plenty of taxes which don't function in the way of forcing you to work more. Taxes on voluntary purchases, for instance, right? Sales tax. You don't have to buy XYZ, right? And often certain necessities, things deemed as necessities, are untaxed. Certain types of groceries, for instance, do not have sales tax on them because they're necessities. So remember that the conclusion is all instances of taxation are immoral. And they are immoral because they're tantamount to slavery. All we have to do to show this argument, as stated, doesn't work, is to show that not all forms of taxation are tantamount to slavery, that is, forced labor. Sales tax looks like it might be one of those, for instance. Now, Robert Nozick may have been referring specifically to income tax, but he didn't say so. He says all instances of taxation are immoral. There's no reason that he wouldn't be aware of sales tax, or other things that are not income tax, like property tax. So it's a very shaky argument it's a very shaky basis that his argument rests on. So we're also assuming, it seems like, that Citizen A doesn't want to pay these taxes, right? What if Citizen A does want to pay these taxes? Oh, I'm perfectly happy to sort of work a little bit extra so that some money goes to the needy. You might think that this resolves the problem in the argument, but Nozick doesn't really care about what the citizen wants, what he'd be happy to do, and willingly submitting to forced labor does not make it either unforced or moral, because coercion can have a sort of corrupting effect on people. So think about this Frankfurt-style situations that we discussed in terms of, in the context of free will. You did choose to submit to forced labor, but if you hadn't so chosen, you would have been punished. This is what coercion works like. So in order to count as being coerced, you don't actually have to be punished. You don't actually have to do anything wrong and be punished. It just has to be that if you did do something against the law, then you would be punished. You already count as being coerced immediately when that threat of punishment, counterfactual though it may be, hangs there. So this doesn't make the work unforced. And furthermore, you might want to do something that you're being forced to do, and you could make some kind of argument that, well, you've been brainwashed or something like that. Nozick could go there, but that's always a difficult point to try and make. You'll also notice that Nozick is sort of using the example of you're being forced to work more to help the needy, as if that's a bad thing. So we don't actually have to think that benefiting the needy is bad for Nozick's point to go through, right? So benefiting the needy can be done in bad ways. So the idea here is just that the ends don't justify the means. Nozick is essentially saying helping the needy is great. If someone wants to do that, then they should. However, no one should be forced to help the needy. So Nozick's argument against taxation is that it forces you to help the needy. So even if you didn't want, even if you did want to do it, and you were being sort of coerced, if you should decide one day that you wanted to stop helping the needy by subsidizing some kind of welfare program through taxes, and you stop paying your taxes, then you'd be arrested, right? So the fact that helping the needy is good, the fact that you currently want to help the needy, or you're fine with helping the needy by paying your taxes, that doesn't really go any way to undoing the validity of Nozick's argument. The earlier stuff that we talked about, where it seems that he's only considering a very narrow type of tax, that does undermine the validity of the argument, or it could. So again, here's an example. If Habitat for Humanity kidnapped me from my bed and forced me to build houses for the victims of hurricane damage, shocking me with a cattle prod when I refused, this would be immoral, right? Even though I'm helping the needy, I'm being forced to do it in a very inappropriate way, right? So we cannot judge something as good, we cannot judge a policy as good simply because the outcome of it is that the needy get helped. That's the issue here. So let's look at premise 6 now. Citizen A receives no benefits for the extra hours spent earning the money to pay her taxes because this money goes to the needy. So here we can see a very clear place to jump off the train of reasoning that Nozick has going here. Nozick is envisioning a taxation scheme in which only people, as it were, only the people who sort of contribute nothing, who do nothing, are benefited by the taxes. It has to be that the taxpayer themselves benefits not at all from paying the taxes. And again, one has to wonder what type of taxation scheme Nozick is talking about. This sort of showed up in, maybe it was the 2012 election cycle, sort of where Mitt Romney and Barack Obama were running against each other. This idea that sort of infrastructure, which is paid for by taxes, it sort of helps build all these things that wealthy industrialists, entrepreneurs claim to have done all by themselves, right? So there was this thing about, you didn't do anything by yourself, wealthy person saying that they are self-made, because you didn't build the electrical infrastructure, the internet infrastructure, the water infrastructure, the transportation infrastructure that your company uses to succeed. That stuff was all built by tax money, right? Federal, state taxes built that infrastructure. So it is very difficult to argue that any individual benefits not at all from the taxes they pay, right? It's not as if all taxes go to welfare programs. In fact, very little proportionally of taxes goes to welfare programs. A great deal of it goes to things like defense spending, which, we don't have to get into an argument about sort of military-industrial complex stuff. We can just state flat out that everyone benefits from that in some way, right? Maybe there's too much spending that goes into it, but it is essentially a necessity, an unfortunate necessity, that large countries large rich countries, basically even small poor countries, have armies to defend themselves from external invaders. Likewise, tax money pays for policing infrastructure, for fire infrastructure, which hopefully protects you when you're the victim of a crime, or prevents you from being the victim of a crime, or puts out your house if it catches on fire, puts out someone else's house when it catches on fire so that it doesn't catch your house on fire, etc., etc. The benefits that each individual citizen in any sort of modern state derives from paying taxation are myriad and innumerable. So this part of Nozick's argument is kind of mind-boggling. It's very difficult to see what place you could be in, sort of logically, for this to make sense. So that's just what I've said in these things here. Unless citizen A depends on the state for absolutely nothing, not even depends on the state, unless citizen A receives and has received in their life absolutely nothing from the state, then P6 is false. We could restrict it to be a little bit more charitable. Let's not talk about citizen A's past. Let's say at this moment while they are paying taxes. It's very unlikely that at this moment they are not gaining some benefit from the taxes they paid, right? You can subdivide each dollar that you pay into tax, sort of into the general things that taxes pay for, and you'll get some number of cents of each dollar go to defense spending, go to welfare programs, so on and so forth. There have been a lot of infographics, which are probably inaccurate, going around on Facebook for the past 4 years about how your tax money divides up, because taxation is a perennially controversial issue. But it is beyond reasonable doubt that when you pay taxes, you benefit from it, at least indirectly. Unless you were sort of born on some like private island with a super rich family that is kind of their own country, and they don't actually have any citizens, it's just their personal fortune, it would be a very odd scenario to construct, which applies to almost nobody. That's the point. So P6 is arguably false for most people. And if P6 is false, if a premise in an otherwise valid argument, which this argument might not even be valid, is false, then the argument is unsound, right? And it doesn't apply to the way things really are. So even if Nozick's argument is valid, it looks like it is almost certainly unsound. The final premise, the one which says, this same argument can be made for any taxpayer, and all instances of taxation are moral. It needs it to be true that there is not a single taxpayer who benefits at all from the taxes, which just looks like it's obviously false. And so it's probably unsound, and it is maybe invalid. It's probably unsound because most taxpayers do benefit at least indirectly, but also likely directly from the taxes they pay. So P6 is false. So taxation doesn't fit into forced labor as defined in P1. Also may be invalid because Nozick moves from premises about an unspecified type of tax, which is levied only to help the needy, to conclusions about all taxes whatsoever. So P3 refers to certain taxes, whereas C6 refers to all instances of taxation. This just looks like a false generalization. So this argument, while it has been very, let's say, rhetorically effective politically in America for quite some time, it doesn't look like it's actually well-formed. Okay, so we're going to continue on this sort of questioning of the legitimacy of state authority. More broadly, we're not going to talk about just taxation, or you're not going to read about just taxation in Wolff's argument for the rejection of state authority. It's going to be a more general rejection of state authority. And so, as usual, this article will be the basis for your active reading assignment, your group discussions, and your individual sum. So, as I said, I will do another brief lecture about what to expect, what you need to do for the presentation assignment, and that will go up right after this one does.